Right, we're getting ready to start. Lovely. Thank you everybody for joining our webinar this morning. It's really wonderful to have you with us, and we're going to be talking about creating a winning communications framework today. We've been running a series of webinars and I think this is our 5th or 6th one. We're doing them once a fortnight, and last week we looked at building a team to improve and increase business performance. Just checking my slides are moving on. Wonderful. So just to give you a quick introduction to People Puzzles, we provide risk-free, affordable access to hard-hitting HR superstars who really get stuck in and help you to scale your business rapidly, increase profits and hit financial targets faster. We really do focus on taking away the people stress and allowing you to do what you do best, so leading your business. We've got a team of about 60 people directors working across the UK. And I'm really delighted to be joined by Jude, who is one of those people directors. So Jude's going to be talking to us this morning about the perspective from being a people director. And I'm also really delighted to welcome Sally Pritchett, who is the CEO of Something Big. And Something Big are a leading internal communications agency based in Surrey. So hello, Sally.
Very pleased to be with you today.
Fantastic. So as I said, today we are focusing on creating a winning communication framework that drives success in challenging times. And I think we'll probably all agree that these still feel like challenging times, although perhaps a little easier than a couple of months ago. So without further ado, we've got 4 different headlines that we're going to be looking at today as part of this communications framework. And the first one is all about managing communications proactively. So Sally, if I can start with you, what does it mean to manage your communications proactively? Because that can seem a slightly strange thing to say in the world of communicating with our own teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for larger organisations, this often means having an internal comms function. So there could be somebody who's completely responsible for that, and therefore it's much easier to be proactive. But for smaller businesses, it sometimes falls between the leadership team, the HR team, and often the marketing team as well. So I think what's really important here is to call it out as a thing. Internal comms is not a nice to have. It's part and parcel of driving a productive workforce. So I think having a framework is around really being clear on who's got what roles and responsibilities. It's the old who, what, when, how of communications. You know, how are we going to communicate with frontline staff who might be on a factory floor versus a desk-based staff who can have access to emails, etc. So it's about really being proactive about having that framework. If you consider things like health and safety or GDPR, you will have frameworks for those sorts of things to make sure nothing falls between the cracks. So internal comms is no different.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's interesting you made that link to productivity there, because I've had some questions in about how comms relates to motivation, and actually they're all part of the same drive to get people aligned and doing their jobs really well. As you say, not just the nice to have. So how do the CEO, HR director or people director and internal comms responsibilities and roles differ?
And I think that's a really great question, because often these lines get a bit blurred and people don't really know what their core piece is. So I think for the CEO and the leaders of an organisation, they really need to sort of firmly sit in that driving the business message part. So that's the vision, the clarity of which direction we're going in. And I think given our current circumstances right now, this is often about the recovery plan. So I would expect our CEOs and leaders to be the ones that are really driving the communication of that recovery plan with confidence, reassuring everyone that what the direction is and what their contribution is. But I think where you've got an HR function there as well, and where that's a really powerful thing, and they can work as a sort of trusted advisor, they can help draw that CEO and leadership team into the sort of people message. They can predict the kind of questions, anxieties, things that the people of your team will want to know, and I think that's their role, is the sort of voice of the team, essentially. And I think marketing, who often are very, very focused, obviously, on getting you new customers and things like that, but they are core communicators. That's what their skill is. That's their sort of strength. So definitely lead with your marketing teams as well to help you get those emails out, to finesse your copy, to use social media where needed, to help you with the comms channels, because they're great at that. So I think there's a strength for all three, but I think going back to your framework, being really clear on who does what and when and how.
Yeah, fantastic. Because actually it's really easy to forget a group of people, maybe if they're working in a different location, or maybe if they have a different type of job, like a regional sales team, or as you say, factory floor. Sometimes it can be easy to maybe not think about every single group that you can communicate with. So a framework, or I don't know, it might end up as a grid or something like that, really helps you to, prompts the memory and means nobody gets left out.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So let's look at our second headline point around being transparent, giving a full picture. And it's an interesting one, treating people like adults. It seems a funny thing to have to mention, but let's unpack that a bit more. So, Jude, how much do you advise CEOs to share with their teams?
Well, this is a really interesting point, Ali, and it can be different for different businesses. So obviously, as a CEO or a business owner, your business is your baby. So going back to kind of sharing and treating people like adults, there is the temptation to go into crisis mode and just take over. But we've got to remember that actually you employ your team to do a role and you have confidence in their skills to do it. So really, one of the things that I do with my leaders is understand, okay, so what is the clear messaging that we want to give? Keep it simple, keep it consistent across the different audiences and channels that we have. So keep your internal comms message with your people and your teams consistent with the messages you are going to give with your external clients, and focus on what is it that your team need to know to support the recovery. So it may be that you want to share different things with different teams, but share early with your senior team, and you may not have all the information to share, but you need to take them into your trust and confidence to be able to actually allow them to do their job. What they can do for you then is share the upward communication about the anticipated challenges, things that they will need to do, or concerns that the other teams will have, which you then need to thread through into your communications and messages. The other thing I would say is keep it simple. So in a difficult time, people can be shocked by the message. So giving too much information to people too quickly can actually get lost. They need to hear a consistent, clear message, but they also need to focus on, or you need to help them focus on, what you need to do and what they need to do to actually be part of the solution. Now, importantly, it's really key to make sure that you update people. So you may not have all the information initially, but if you say that and you come back, follow up on your promise and fill in the gaps. So just one really brief kind of example that I've had recently is an organisation that I've worked with, a client who lost their biggest customer. And it was a massive body blow to them as a business. As a discussion with the CEO, we decided that actually we'd share the news early, we'd give high level information to people, and then come back to them with a recovery plan, talking to people about the messaging that we were giving, what we needed to do, and the key word for them was customer service. So everybody was focusing on customer service to continue to actually supply and to delight the customers they had. As a consequence of that, their engagement internally went up massively. People's performance actually increased rather than decreased, and it genuinely has turned the business round. So the engagement culture they've got now and the clarity of feedback, it's like working somewhere else.
That's fantastic. It's not a story you hear all that often. And I guess it's a strange one, isn't it? Because that example, which is fantastic about a crisis that could be jumped on and then worked through, the thing about the way we're all facing the coronavirus impact is that it's very long lasting and we don't know all of the impact yet. And we're sort of coming out of it. So I guess I sort of picked up on a sense that people were really good at communicating at the beginning, and there was a lot of effort and comms and you know, sharing videos and sending messages to the team. But actually, there's been a bit of fatigue around some of those comms as time has gone on. And actually, you know, we need to just not get lazy, and we need to up our, you know, our efforts. And as you say, come back to that communications framework, Sally, because I guess that can stop us getting lazy, because there's that prompt to keep going. So, Sally, what about this concept of communicating internally versus externally? Is there a difference between what we want to share with the team and share with the world?
And I think this is a really great point to make, because I think what can trip people up, especially where you're talking both internally and externally via the same sort of digital social media channels, you've really got to have one voice, one story. But people can find that difficult in an organisation. And Jude's example is a great one. You might not want all of your external audiences to know that you've just lost a key customer. So that this question around how do we have one story for these two audiences. I'm a great advocate of honesty. So right now, many businesses are working on a recovery plan, whether that's getting back to an office, reopening a shop, or whatever it may be. And I think that you sort of circle your comms around that core recovery plan, and then you pivot the style of that conversation to your two different audiences. So for your customers, they want to hear that you're reopening offices or reopening a facility, or that you're working on something. And your team internally also need to know what's happening and what they need to do to contribute that. And like Jude says, treating them like adults as well, so that they understand what they've got to do. I think it can be very, very confusing for internal teams if you've got this very positive message out to the customer, and yet internally, you know, it's a bit more doom and gloom. So I think stick to the honesty. And I think if you want a check back and you're not really sure if you've got two different messages going on, go back to your organizational values. And if you're finding that you're pivoting different values for different audiences, then you want to dig a bit deeper and understand why there's a disparity, because that suggests to me that there's a misalignment, and that's a real problem. So values are a great way for us to use all of our comms and make sure that we're aligned. It's a tricky environment because, and a tricky topic, because your teams will be following you all in social media and be reading all of your external comms in the same way as your internal. So one message: honesty, stick to your values.
Yeah. And actually, I guess at this time, it's been easier to say things are tough than it may have been at other times, because we're all in the same, we're not all in the same boat, definitely, but we all know the boat's there and that the storm is real. So it's it makes more sense, I guess, at the moment. So Jude, when it comes to sharing sort of more bad news, I guess we know lots of companies are having to restructure, make redundancies. How do we draw the line about how much to share?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think that ultimately, sharing news on a consistent and a regular basis means that there should be no surprises. And I think that's the important one. So when you're thinking about the fact that an organisation might have trading difficulties because of the current situation, then as long as you are communicating with your teams regularly, talking to them and getting feedback on the other way. So making sure that communication goes up as well as down, that's absolutely critical. What you can then do is tailor your messages so that ultimately, if you do then have to give bad news, you're giving it in a way where people understand how it impacts them. You see your business through your eyes as an owner or a CEO. You also need to think about how people see the business and their concerns as a team member or as a leader. Ultimately, you do need to make sure that you look to your values. And I think, Sally, you made a really great point there, because if you don't, you will be beaten by them in the future. If you don't stick to your values and they're just words on a page, nobody will trust you. And trust is a fundamental basis of all engagement within people, regardless of whether it's an organisation, your family or friends. If you don't have that level of trust, that will erode your ability for people to perform and actually do their best for you. And that's critical in difficult times. But ultimately, again, bad news is bad news. Let's remember that, treating people as adults, they will get bad news all the time in their lives. They get bad news outside of work. So they can take it. You don't need to necessarily protect them, but think about the way in which you deliver it. and listen to your teams and your leaders that are actually reporting to you. They will give you feedback and they will give you such critical information that will help you to actually use the right channel and use the right wording as well to make sure that it resonates with people. But don't give people too much information too much or too quickly, because they need to be able to digest it. That's the most important thing. Keep it clear, keep it simple, and keep it relevant to the people that you're actually speaking to.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Jude. And I think your point about, you know, where our team trust us, they can continue to be motivated by their job and, you know, by believing in us as leaders. Whereas if you erode that trust, and that can be done kind of quite accidentally or thoughtlessly, or just by not telling them enough. And we all know that in the presence of a vacuum, you know, people just start talking and making noise, whether they're in the same office or not. So keeping that simple, straightforward, honest communication is really valuable. And I do think one of the hardest, you know, it's very easy to just forget to do that. I can say that myself as a business owner. So look, let's skip to something a little bit more positive. I think sharing successes is something we agree can help even in tough times. Sally, what kind of successes are worth sharing? And have you got any ideas for how we can do that best?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in all organisations, this can often be underplayed. I think the value of positive information coming out in terms of that productivity, that motivation and morale of the team is critical. So, you know, perhaps aim to over-index in this area. I think there are the sort of 3 core ways that you can really search out those positive success stories at the moment. Without sounding boring, I'm going to go back to values, but I think, you know, culture breeds culture. So right now you will have some difficult situations going on, but you'll also have lots of great examples of people living and breathing your values. So I would, encourage you to go back to your piece of paper with your values on and look at them one by one, and look for employees in the team who are, you know, going above and beyond, going the extra mile, having a can-do attitude, or whatever your values are, and find examples of those and really be loud and proud with that. And that can be internally and externally. And the vital thing about that is that does 2 things. It recognises and rewards the person that's done that, and that's great, and they will feel good about that. But it will also encourage more of that behaviour. It says, when it comes from the leader, it says, this is good behaviour, this is what I want more of. And you will get rewarded by more of that behaviour the more you talk about it. So I think successes come in living and breathing your values. And I actually think a lot of CEOs are a bit shy about shouting about their own sort of living and breathing of the values. If one of them is a can-do attitude or something like that, and you're demonstrating it, then also talk about that. I think the second area, and I think this is often underplayed as well, although we have, gratefully, I've seen it a lot in the last few months, but saying thank you. I think the value of thank you is huge. And sometimes I would encourage people to think, well, this is cheaper than a pay rise. But, you know, it can go a long, long way. So don't just think about how you say it. Think about how you demonstrate it. You know, a great example of something I've just done in the last few months is we sent a fresh pizza making kit out to our whole team individually. And, you know, it cost me a few £100. But actually what it did is it brought all the team together. They felt on that sort of Friday night that there was this huge love and morale across the team. And it was a way to say thank you. A very simple thing. But yeah, say thank you loudly within your team meetings, within external comms, etc. And the third thing that I think maybe alludes to where Jude was a minute ago as well is we are going to see that we lose business. We might lose a key customer. We might have to close a factory. We might have to even make redundancies in this really difficult time. So I would seek out the positive messages, the ones that say we've won a new customer, we're working on a new project, we've got a new machine, you know, all of those sorts of things. And if we are missing our offices, one of the things that I don't think we will be in our office until September, but I am sharing pictures when I go into the office. I'm telling telling people about our plans, I'm giving them that positivity that it's coming. And I think that I would probably suggest right now, even if you don't normally talk about every single new customer, that's probably the time to just give those green shoots of positivity to your team.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Sally. And I like that's really practical advice. And, you know, we sent a box of chocolates out to all of the team last week. And I think I got more emails back from the team than I've had in ages. So it's amazing what a little treat gets you back in terms of some connectivity and some love.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So our fourth headline and our final headline this morning is around facing up to anxiety and how we support line managers, which I guess feels like it's taking a lot more time at the moment than it has done it when we've been face to face in the same place, and that actually can feel quite a weight and feel like a lot of people to be responsible for, or it could be something we don't feel responsible for at all and therefore maybe isn't happening. So Jude, practically what does it mean to do this, to support people with anxiety, to support line managers? How can we help people at the moment, and why should we bother?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? The thing to remember for me is that everybody is different. So every single person has a very different level of resilience to stress and ability to cope in difficult times. And you will be surprised. Some of the people that you would expect to be much more resilient than others will crumble. Now, you don't know actually whether that's because they're crumbling because of issues at work, but it might actually be issues outside of work as well. So people have more than work in their lives. And I think that's one of the things that I would say just to remember. Now, understandably, it is difficult at the moment. One of the things I am noticing quite a lot is that people are really struggling to make decisions and struggling to actually to kind of do things that they would normally do without really thinking about it. So the really important thing for me in terms of supporting people is supporting them with the confidence, talking through with them, and actually coaching them rather than necessarily telling them. Some people actually will be very, very disturbed about issues, and it may well be that they're not the right person to actually do something. And there may be a time when you have to take a judgment call to actually give a piece of work to somebody else to do, because actually it's not the right thing for that person. You may well damage them. I guess what I would say is always keep an open mind. Make sure that actually you understand your employees or you understand your team members themselves. If you are noticing different behaviours, just note it. Have a conversation, talk to people, but ultimately remember that you are not a counsellor yourself, okay? So taking on that responsibility for somebody else is the wrong thing to do. Helping them to actually reach out to find help themselves if it is serious is the right thing to do. But ultimately, it's about knowing your people, and it's about living your values, and it's about being open about it. There is nothing wrong in sharing with somebody that you've had difficult times to, and you've got through them. Now, you know, it's not an agony aunt line, but ultimately they have to actually see, and they will respect you for saying, yeah, I've had my problems. Well, I've had my difficult times. I've got through them. Is there anything I can do to help? But being there, being available, and knowing your team is absolutely critical for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of our line managers may not have ever done that virtually. They may not have ever done that full stop, because actually when things are going well, there's much less anxiety and less pressure around. And so actually engaging with what support our line managers need at the moment, I think is well worth doing, because it doesn't actually take much. You know, an hour's training on Zoom here, or a 30-minute session on, you know, distance coaching your, you know, the people who report to you, or how to set good KPIs and then measure when you can't see somebody. We need to give people those tools. And if we look back, you know, over the last 6-12 months, do we think all our line managers have had some support, some training, some guidance about how to do that? And I think now more than ever, because as Sally said, might not be back in the office till September, or some companies are saying January, we can't just let things roll until, you know, 3 months, 6 months time, and not give people the tools and the skills they need to be able to support their teams. So yeah, I'd really encourage everybody to think about what help their line managers are getting, because they're kind of on the front line for you at the moment. They're the ones who are helping the whole machine work really well, the organization keep functioning. So, Sally, I know we've sort of only got a couple of minutes left, but have you just got a quick story for us about how you've been doing some of this at Something Big?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit with mental health and say, actually, the rules still apply for diversity. And we've been doing a huge amount of work on Black Lives Matter recently, obviously, helping a lot of our clients. So I think the first thing I would say is acknowledgement is key. So with both mental health and with diversity, the first thing to do is stop questioning whether it's happening, it's an issue within your organization. I get a lot of organizations who come to me and say, well, it's not really a problem for us, but we'll just do some comms. And you're like, it's a problem for everyone. So let's just acknowledge that for a start. And then the second thing, which is where internal comms and HR can really support here, is we need to really permit and develop the dialogue. So we need to have an ongoing conversation that everybody feels safe to have, whether that's diversity or mental health. And I think this is where your organization needs to work out what your language is that fits your values. I know I'm getting boring, but the language of your organization, what works with your culture. That conversation is often very uncomfortable for many organizations to begin with, but I reassure you, it will get more and more comfortable. So we've been talking about mental health for probably at least 3 years within our organization, and we've helped many, many clients on it. So already in the last few months, we've really benefited from that conversation being very open already. I would encourage you to really, really start to have those conversations now.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Sally and Jude. Really appreciate you joining me. And just wanted to finish with some top tips that I've pulled out from today. So make sure you create a comms framework that looks at all team members and is multi-channel, because not everybody takes in information in the same way. Make sure you give a full picture, you share bad news wisely, and as Jude said, it's simple, it's straightforward, and you're not giving too much at a time. Share successes regularly, and everybody will have some. As Sally suggested, start with your values if you're not quite sure where to go. Address anxiety and other concerns head on. This affects everybody, and it's not a nice to have. It comes back to whether your team trusts you, and that has a direct impact on motivation. And make sure you are training and supporting your line managers, because they are at the front line for you all the time, but even more at the moment. So our next webinar is in 2 weeks, 22nd of July, and it's all about how do you approach restructuring your business, because it could be the difference between success and failure. And that might be about structuring it for growth, or it might be about restructuring it because it has been a difficult time. And we know companies are over the whole spectrum. So we've got Joe and Lois from People Puzzles with you next time. And this is a bit of new technology that we're going for here. So if you don't mind, really quickly, just having a quick vote. Was this webinar valuable and a good use of your time? Look at us with our amazing use of Zoom. And how well equipped do you feel to improve your internal communications? It would be fantastic if you're able to just do a quick vote on that, because that would really help us as we're looking to put together the content for next time. So thank you all so much for voting, and I'll just leave you with this final slide. We are offering a complimentary 30 minutes one-to-one to discuss any issues that have been raised today. I know we haven't given you the full picture about how to do a comms framework. We've given you some ideas that are hopefully useful, but obviously in 30 minutes we can't give you the whole thing. So look, please do get in touch with us. Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully see you in 2 weeks. Thanks again, Sally and Jude, and that's all for today.